those opening lines to that, people sitting gently on their front porches watching the world go by. You know, we have, as I was saying, friendships at all different levels, don't we? Front porch friends, front room friends, and kitchen table friends. All have a place in our lives. Of course, the ones that touch us the most deeply are our kitchen table friends. And at our house, we call these people refrigerator friends. And we need a few refrigerator friends. And a refrigerator friend is the one who comes to your house and in the middle of a conversation may be the person who says, "Hey, what do you got in here? Can I have some of this?" Now, this is a metaphor. I mean, you may actually have some friends like that, I do. But even your best friend who might be willing to die for you might not want you rummaging through his cupboards. So everybody has it's a metaphor. And only a few people in our lives are these kinds of friends. And sometimes they're friends of long standing, and sometimes they're friends who are more recent. It has everything to do with the relationship. And by the way, this is just a metaphor. Did I mention that? I once heard someone talk about our relationship with God using a similar metaphor. You know, a front porch relationship with God is where we're on good terms with our understanding of God. The God of our understanding, we're comfortable. We seek out God when we have the spiritual equivalent of needing a cup of sugar. A front room relationship with God is deeper and closer. We seek God actively through study, through prayer, through service, through listening, through exploring. We want to live more closely to divine, sacred, full life as God intends. And a kitchen table relationship with God. Now that's a thing. A kitchen table relationship with God. That's a thing. It involves a readiness to let God into the kitchen where the mess is, where the mugs don't match, and where sometimes you lick the spoon and put it back in the drawer if no one's looking. It's not as pretty as the front yard, it's not as civilized as the front room, but it's where we live our deepest, most authentic life. And we've talked in this series a little bit a couple of weeks ago about letting God, about sometimes just stopping our efforts and our work and letting God do for us what we can't do for ourselves, having a posture of openness to whatever gifts God is offering us in this season of our life. It's not something we work for or strive after. It's a kind of willingness. It's a kind of humbleness that says, you know, sometimes I don't even know what I need or want. And God will show me because we're willing to let God do God's thing. And that's something of a gift. There's a mystery about a kitchen table relationship with God. Now, I don't mean mystery by, like, check your brain at the door, we don't understand it. It's a spiritual thing. Some things just have the quality of a spiritual mystery. And a kitchen table relationship with God is one of those things. This meal we share together is one of those things. At the kitchen table, everyone is equal. And no one has anything to prove, and no one is spiritually superior to anyone else. You bring your whole messy self and your talents and your gifts and what you've learned and what you haven't learned yet and what you're still learning, and right there, God sits with you in the crying and the brokenness and the hopefulness and the wistfulness and the remembering. Now, at the risk of beating this house metaphor to death, I want to tell you a little something about house churches as they appear in early Christianity, because it's really pretty important to understand how this works if we're going to understand this passage from Romans. The traditional picture of house churches in Christianity may be familiar to you. It's usually about 30 or 40 people in a house church who meet in a large standalone villa like this, which belongs to a patron or a patroness, and they control this space. This space belongs to them. Now, what that meant is that the early Christian house church very much reflected the social structure of the Greco-Roman world around it. It means that the patron, and sometimes in rare cases a patroness, has almost total control and domination over the people in this house. They are the decider, the householder, the boss of wives, children, slaves, servants, and anyone of lower social status who comes into the house. Now, this matters because the agape love of the house church that we hear about also has an aspect of what scholars call love patriarchalism. Love patriarchalism. Now, that would sound pejorative to us nowadays. It's not. It's not pejorative. It's not bad at all. Context is everything. Context is everything. What this means is that the patron, or, in rare cases, the patroness, has a lot of control, because the society gives it to them, over these 30 or 40 people in the house church. And the New Testament writings encourage these patrons to behave lovingly toward their social inferiors. Now, we would find that patronizing and condescending. It wasn't. What it was, in fact, was disruptive and dangerous. It was an uncommon way of behaving. If you want to hold your place in the social structure, there are certain behaviors expected of you, and everybody needs you to do this. I mean, this is why Jesus was forever getting in trouble, is he was asking people to behave in a way that upsets the social structure, and nobody wants the social structure upset. It would have been a kind of self-humiliation to treat your wife or your children or your slaves or your servants or even some of your socially inferior friends as if they were persons of value. The way you're supposed to behave is that they are only of value to you in an economic sense, but to treat them as human beings worthy of love and care, you could really risk your social status behaving like that. And social status translates to financial security. So everybody has something at stake in making sure the system stays the way it is. I mean, it's easy to believe that the person at the top wants the social structure to stay where it is, but the people at the bottom do too. I mean, if the patron suddenly has no income, how does that help the servants and the slaves? It was a new way of relating from within the hierarchical structure that focused on love and care and mutual responsibility within the social structure. And, it's easy for us 2,000 years out to see what's wrong with that, but in the context, it was plenty radical and dangerous at the time. It absolutely looked like Jesus' radical, dangerous hospitality, where no matter your social status, you were a valued human. However, think about this. People being people, what kind of shared meal do you suppose happened at these large villa house churches? 30 or 40 people. How is the hierarchical structure at play here? What did a gathering like that feel like? Well, the communal meal, what we now call communion, happened actually over a whole evening once a week, or in the morning, just depends. And people would gather, they would eat, they would be singing, they would be reading from the Bible, by which I mean the Jewish Bible. Sometimes they had some early manuscripts to read, or they would hear from a disciple of a disciple, there would be some teaching, and there would be some eating. And one of the things we know is that some folks played their social elite card even at the shared Christian meal. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul takes this on pretty hard. he says to them, "You have turned the Lord's Supper into a gathering at which the wealthy eat and drink and leave nothing for the poor folks." How does that resemble the Christian relationship? How is that the people at the top taking good care of the people at the bottom, recognizing them as humans? It was as if, for the folks in Corinthians at least, being a part of the Christian church, following Jesus, really didn't change their behavior in any way. And Paul took them to account for it. What I discovered reading about Romans this week is that not all house churches were this kind of house church. We don't often hear about tenement churches. This is what a tenement looked like in cities in ancient Rome. This is what Pompeii looked like. This is what all kinds of things looked like. And there's a reason we use the word tenement. These are crowded, they're sordid, they're full of people, small rooms with 14 people. There was a place to sleep. Most of these people could not cook for themselves, so there were, you can see it in the documentaries. There's evidence of what we would just call fast food on the corner. Among all of this stuff in the urban underclass was basically fast food. And there were early Christian churches. In fact, the very first Christian churches for which we have the most evidence happened in environments like this. No patron, no patroness, no real social structure at all. It's the urban underclass. It's all slaves and former slaves. And you know how we know this? Because there are names that are typical for slaves and former slaves, and we have records of the names of people who were in these churches. So we know what they looked like. 12, 15 people in a cramped space. Now, if there's going to be a gathering with scripture reading and singing and prayer and a meal, then everybody needs to play fair here. And everybody will play fair, because these are the people who need every meal. They can't afford to skip a meal. If somebody eats your share of it at the church potluck, you don't get to just go home and fill in from your own refrigerator. And now we know that Jesus said, "Wherever two or more are gathered, I'm there with you. You can be sure." And when Matthew put this into his gospel, I'm guessing it was just these sort of people about whom he was concerned. People who were in their tenement church, and there was no one of social status. There was no one to take charge. There was really no one to take care of them. And Jesus and Matthew wanted to make sure people knew they didn't have to be somebody out there to be somebody at the kitchen table of the Lord. And that's typical Jesus. Jesus often confounded folks for whom love was conditional. Jesus often just confounded folks for whom love was conditional. This is life-threateningly dangerous teaching. But we know now the litmus test for Jesus was love. Always love. Not pleasant emotions or even good behavior, but genuine concern for all of God's children. Jesus chose time and time again to seek out the intimate part of someone's heart. The kitchen table sharing. To bring us from the front porch right through the front room and sit down with us in the kitchen. It's no easy thing. That's why I'm always grateful that even though we don't have a prayer of confession every week, we always do have a prayer of confession when we come to this table. Because it's important to remember that our faith is aspirational. Our faith is aspirational. That means we're trying. We're really trying. We're doing everything we know to try. And most of us go home and go, came up short again. Although once in a while, go ahead, pat yourself on the back when you really do a good Jesus thing, really. I shared with you, I think last week, or maybe it was the week before, about the concept of a sacramental fence. That is, people who establish rules for who gets to come to the table and who doesn't. You have to be a part of my church. You have to believe the way I feel. You have to be a certain age. You have to be up to date on your pledge. Somebody somewhere decides who's in and who's out, who gets to be at the table. And one of the things I like about being a United Methodist is that we clearly state that we have an open table. Everyone gets to come to the table. No matter where your life journey has taken you, if you're here today, this table is for you. I once had a woman ask me after church, why do you give communion to little children, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old? They can't possibly understand what they're doing. Why are you doing that? And it was a very sincere question, and it deserved a sincere answer. And the only answer I had for her was, I don't know. I don't understand it most of the time. It's a mystery. We're all children, incapable of understanding fully the invitation that God extends to us when we are invited to the table. We come confessing our shortcomings, but we also know that no matter who we are, what social status we occupy this week or used to, we're not here to serve at table, although that's an honor, or pick up crumbs. Even Jesus got challenged on that one, but to sit at the heart of the house, right at the kitchen table with the family. In this Come to the Table series for several weeks, and for a few more weeks, we hear the call to dine with Jesus, an invitation extended to us over and over again as we read Scripture, as we share stories. It's an invitation that means so much more than just an eating experience, which it never is with Jesus. This is the table where Jesus feeds people literally and spiritually and asks them to feed one another and challenges them to acts of hospitality that might even be a little dangerous. When we say yes to a place at Christ's table, we accept a lifestyle that lets God define what is love, what is peace, what is grace, what is joy. It's a deep thing we're called to share in. It's a mystery. It's a spiritual mystery, whether it's lemonade on the front porch, wine and cheese in the front room, barbecue around the pool, or leftover spaghetti for breakfast at the kitchen table. We gather to be fed with the finest food on offer, the food of love and grace. But secretly, I think the best times are when we sit together at the kitchen table, even if it's just biscuits and biscuits and lemonade. May it be so at our table today.